What's really worrying to me is not how is this ballroom going to go, is we have an American president in the middle of a massive geopolitical crisis that could change the world, and that's what he's talking about.
Yes.
That's what he's thinking about, the ballroom.
I just want to move on to another story. It seems like a smaller scale story, doesn't it, compared to this sort of enormous geopolitical crisis conversation that we're having just at the moment. I'm now going to just get your thoughts on the reflecting pool, that now world famous short stretch of water above the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, very proud to have this thing renovated. He got a pal of his to do the work. And the work seems to have been rather botched. It wasn't a particularly good renovation. The water, you remember, turned into an algae-ridden swamp very soon after the work was done. It was embarrassing. It was the cost overran, the time overran, and Donald Trump was most unhappy. Well, then it was decided that he blamed saboteurs for what was going wrong. And there was some film of some people with their hands in the water, and that was Donald Trump then saying that was sabotage. One of these people was an Olympian, a former Olympian, and Donald Trump wanted them prosecuted, and prosecuted hard. Well, fast forward to where we are now, where the US attorney for Washington, D.C., Jeanine Pirro, got the advice and gave the verdict. We cannot prosecute these people. There's not the evidence that this is a crime we could get a conviction for. Cue Donald Trump. What did he think about that? He was rather unhappy. Just have a listen to this.
When Jeanine looked at it, it was the day after the 4th of July with the largest fireworks display in the world. That was working beautifully, and it was vandalized. We weren't necessarily thrilled with the contractor, but they did a job, and they were fixing any problems. But then it got carried away because the judge was extremely unfriendly to Jeanine, and frankly, I think she choked. And I was disappointed with Jeanine Pirro, really disappointed with Jeanine Pirro. She folded like an umbrella. She folded like an umbrella and didn't deliver the prosecutions that the president wanted. Jeanine Pirro, by the way, one of the most devoted supporters of Donald Trump over past years. Now it looks like her job's on the line. She's being dragged around verbally by President Trump, whatever she may argue, that you cannot prosecute a case if you haven't got the evidence. Our colleague on the Times, David Charter in Washington, well, had his view on this.
It's just once again proof, John, that what passes as evidence in MAGA rhetoric simply doesn't count as evidence in a court of law. And of course, we've seen that with the endless claims of election rigging, that none of which have passed muster in court. This is just the latest example where Trump is demanding that his, in inverted commas, prosecutors, in fact, they're the independent state prosecutors now, bring prosecutions because he thinks it's a clear and obvious case.
So I'd call this, Josh and Joe, I'd call it extraordinary, except it's not at all extraordinary. It's absolutely in the pattern, the way business is done in Washington, D.C. under this administration, Joe.
I mean, I think it's incredibly worrying for this White House project of this giant ballroom, because the project itself, I mean, you look into the details and how there was a sort of, it was almost a closed bid process. It was a friend, I think, of Donald Trump's in the first place that said that they thought someone was over and said that the water looked really dirty. It now looks like there was a faulty installation of the pool liner that goes into the actual monument, and that was responsible for effectively for it to start to peel off and stuff to grow in the space. It sounds like an absolute mess and a real, I mean, it's one of those stories that, you know, here would be a resigning matter for someone who is in charge of the project, because it just looks like it's been completely cocked up from the start. But it does make you worry about exactly what's going into the White House ballroom, because there is that huge project to have this amazing, you know, part of the White House being renovated so they can have a proper party, because apparently you can't have a proper party the way it is at the moment. And the worry is, how is that project being conducted? Because there does appear to have been something's gone wrong in the process behind the scenes, and this is from a man who's run a property empire, which makes you wonder kind of why it's been so badly handled. But it does strike me that there will be, you know, it's fine to put the blame over on the judge, but it certainly looks as though there are some serious questions as to how the project's been carried out. It's cost a fortune for what is effectively relining an area that holds water.
You know, John, you pointed out that this is a bit of a segue from the very serious conversation we were having earlier about Iran. I actually think they're two sides of the same coin, in the sense that Maggie Haberman, the New York Times correspondent, who is widely seen as the best reporter on Trump, just written a book called Regime Change about Trump, which is in the bestseller list. She said the other day that Trump is spending about 70% of his time talking and thinking about the ballroom renovation that you were just mentioning, Joe, and related matters such as the lining of the pool. Of course, how American is it that the lining of a swimming pool is also, is becoming, the swimming pool lining is becoming the sort of great political issue. But I really do think we underestimate just how bizarrely and inappropriately and unexpectedly Donald Trump is behaving in terms of how he thinks. There is this kind of magical thinking that goes on with him, where he can just sort of speak things into reality. Charter mentioned the election interference and fraud claims from 2020. I think this is another example we've seen in Iran. He thinks he can just kind of talk them into a good deal. It's not going to happen. And this ballroom stuff, he thought he could just tell Janine Pirro she'll do the right thing. Janine's one of ours, as you mentioned, John. She's an old friend of his, but he is just hitting up against the limits of actual reality here. But what's really worrying to me is not how is this ballroom going to go, is we have an American president in the middle of a massive geopolitical crisis that could change the world, and that's what he's talking about.
Yes,
that's what he's thinking about, the ballroom.
Yeah.
It's so Trump, and it's just it's amazing to me that 10 years after this guy first came into office, we're still in this bizarre world where it is Donald Trump's head and we're all stuck in it.
Yeah, and I think you make a pretty compelling point there, Josh. And it's not just about this fixation on an ornamental pool in the middle of Washington, D.C. We're talking about the president seeking the prosecution, with potentially severe penalties for the sake of saving face, when his own loyal US attorney is saying we cannot get a conviction here, and now she is in line for this. We got used to the idea of politically driven prosecutions in America. The last Attorney General, Pam Bondi, got into lots of trouble for not being hard and fast enough in pursuing Donald Trump's political critics and opponents with criminal cases. And now, but this over a stretch of not blue water, over an ornamental pool in front of the Lincoln Memorial. I
mean, Trump struggles to conceive of a distinction between his own personal interests and the interests of the US government. And so all of these things, he doesn't see the Justice Department as an independent entity that has its own rules and norms. He sees it as an arm of Trump Inc. And he can't understand why, if someone screwed up his swimming pool at one of his hotels, he'd go sue him. Right, he'd get his best lawyer and he'd go sue him, and he can't understand why Janine Pirro isn't acting on his whims
and locking him up.
But that's also why this idea of a deal in around the sort of the Strait and what's going on with Iran just seems quite hard to contemplate that it would happen, because he can't let it lie. That is a problem. It doesn't feel as if he can let things lie. So the idea that at the end of this process with the Strait of Hormuz and what's going on in Iran, that Iran may have got one over on him, it just doesn't seem very reasonable to me that he would just let that happen in the same way that he would want to go to the nth degree to punish somebody over this renovation that appears to have gone significantly wrong, because that's just not in his nature. He's not going to chalk that one up as a defeat and go, okay, we move on.
He has to show a victory, and it's simply not possible.
Yeah.
And so there, in a corner, stuck